How do you see the AMCA project, panning out over the next 15 years? Whom do you see the contract being given to?
And in 2017 or 18, the government decided to pull out of the fifth generation fighter aircraft because the Russian program, because they felt that Russia was not giving us the technology we wanted. Without your own engine, you are nowhere in the fighter jet business. Without your own engine, all you're designing are airframes. So every aircraft but for your Rafale and your Sukhois are going to be in service. So you need something like 200 to 300 fighter aircraft to come in. That's a very large number. So which is why they're saying we need 40 aircraft a year. That's a very, very ambitious target.
Welcome to Inna Defence. This week, India's quest to design and develop its own true blue Indian fifth generation fighter jet got a big push with the government clearing what they call the execution model. The way I see it, that's just a term I think they use to sort of say that the roadmap of how this project will now go forward in terms of who will be involved for designing and developing this fighter jet, that has been sort of cleared by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. This clearance comes around a year after the Cabinet Committee on Security cleared rupees 15,000 crore for this project. And that money will be used to design and develop, if I'm not wrong, around 5 prototypes of what is known as the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. Very, very crucially, the statement on the execution model clearance sort of opened this project up for the private sector, allowing the private sector to enter territory that was previously the sole domain of the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, a state-owned aerospace company. So why is this such a big deal? What is the AMCA? Can the AMCA even see the light of day without India being able to develop its own fighter jet engine? We are going to be discussing this and a lot more on this episode. And for that, I have Sandeep Unnithan. Hi, Sandeep. Thanks for being with me.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me back.
Sandeep, before we begin, tell me if I would be wrong to say that the length of your career has sort of spanned the exact time in India's quest to develop its own fighter jet. Not the AMCA per se, but whether it's a Tejas Mark 1A and so on and so forth. So you probably have seen this from maybe the time you started off as an intern somewhere, to now where you've finished around 30 years covering the world of defense, and you've seen this project.
That's an interesting way to frame that question, Dave. But yeah, it is, aviation is a very, very time intensive business. And it's taken the rest of the Western world decades to reach where they are today in the way they've designed their own engines, and they're making their fifth and even sixth generation fighter aircraft. In our case, we began this journey, in the 60s with the Marut, which we abandoned in the 70s because of the engine worries. And then we restarted that. We rebooted the program, I would say that, with the light combat aircraft in 1983. But yeah, you're right. So it's around the time that I entered journalism, which was in the 90s, the light combat aircraft started to get developed. And you saw the first, glimmer of hope when finally in 2001, the LCA finally flew. But that's, it's more than 25 years now. The LCA has entered squadron service, and the Mark 1A hopefully should be entering the Air Force in large numbers.
Before we get into the AMCA and why this statement on the execution model is so significant, I want to actually first get you to decode this generation confusion that I have. It's like, understanding Gen Alpha, Gen Z, Millennials. It's sort of like that for me when you have Generation 4, Generation 4.5, Generation 5. And very interestingly, by the way, and this is something that missed my radar. In February, when a full-scale display model of the AMCA was put up at the Aero India show, there was a PIB press release on that in which they called it 5.5. Right. So I want to understand what are these different aircraft generations. And how do you end up putting a particular aircraft in one particular slot?
Well, interesting question, Dave. Given the fact that you're talking about a fifth generation fighter aircraft. Now, these generations are used to refer to fighter jets, which began to be introduced beginning in the closing stages of the Second World War. That is when you saw the first generation fighter jets entering squadron service. The Me-262 Schwalbe that the Germans produced, and of course the Gloucester Meteor. These were the first two fighter jets to enter squadron service. And then you had the Vietnam War, the Korean War before that in the 50s, where you had the first fighter jets actually that dueled in the skies over Korea, where you had the MiG-15s and then later the MiG-17s, and you had the F-86 Sabre jets. Those were the second generation of fighter jets. Vietnam War, you saw possibly the third generation of fighter jets, which were bigger, which had more combat endurance, larger payloads. And this continued till the 70s, when you saw what you have today in most air forces of the world. I mean, we of course operate some third generation modified aircraft, the MiG-21s.
Yes.
It's probably one of the last of those air forces operating the MiG-21s. But then you had, in the 70s, the fourth generation fighter aircraft coming in, which was primarily the F-14s, the F-15s, the Sukhoi 27s, the MiG-29s. These are all fourth generation aircraft. But somewhere in the late 90s, you began this, a lot of countries started going towards what is called the fifth generation fighter aircrafts, which is basically a generation jump over the fourth generation. So if you look at it, the third and fourth generations aircraft didn't have, a very big gap between them, But in terms of capabilities and whether it is ordnance capabilities, stealth. Now, stealth was very important. That was the X factor in all of these fifth generation aircraft that started to be developed in the late 90s on. And the United States, of course, was way ahead of the curve when they developed two fifth generation aircraft, the F-22 and the F-35. And of course, the Russians followed suit, but the Chinese caught up rather quickly. So you have fifth generation aircraft which have stealth. Stealth is the most important characteristic. And you have super cruise, which is the ability to fly at extended supersonic speeds without firing your afterburners, and a whole lot of other capabilities like sensor fusion and those kind of things. Very advanced electronics and communications and data links and all of that. So it's primarily the United States that's way ahead of the world in fifth generation fighters. The Chinese are catching up. They have two fifth generation fighter aircraft in squadron service, and they have a sixth generation.
Yes.
They're working on two sixth generation prototypes as well. The Russians have been a little slow because of primarily resource constraints, technology constraints. They've built the Su-57, which a lot of people argue is not a true fifth generation fighter aircraft. It has certain limitations. But we have been in the game, from around 2008 or 9, when we began the quest for a fifth generation fighter aircraft with the AMCA, which you mentioned, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft Program, which is still, we've only seen a prototype. We've only seen, a model, a scale model. We are yet to see a prototype, I must clarify. And we are in 2025. We're still a decade away from getting these planes into service. So it's a dream. It's been in the pipeline for very long. And, we are wrestling with a lot of issues there. I mean, squadron numbers. We are yet to even get Gen 4 and Gen 4.5 fighter jets. So the fifth generation is a little way down the line.
Yeah. So it's way down the line, but it's happening.
Yes.
And I think India is solidly behind the idea that it's going to, at some point, end up developing its own fifth generation fighter jet, and it does not want to depend on foreign supplies for obvious reasons. The very significant thing of the government statement that came out a couple of days ago was that it did not mention Hindustan Aeronautics Limited even once. Now, that's strange because in media headlines, you can do a basic Google search. You will always see this term HAL AMCA, HAL AMCA, HAL AMCA, because it was always believed, it was a given, ki banayega to HAL. And I'm guessing people within the HAL also believe that, which is probably why what is happening. So the statement basically says that a consortium can come together. It can be public companies, it can be private companies. So basically, HAL still has a way into this project. But what the government is saying is that we will take it on merits. Whoever sends the best bid, whoever seems the most competent, whoever promises the best timelines, and perhaps is realistic enough in terms of what they're offering and what they're proposing, they'll get the contract to design and develop this fifth generation fighter jet. I want your overview of how did we reach here, how long was it coming, and whether what's happened in the last couple of years with respect to delays of the Tejas Mark 1A
Yeah.
and the grounding of the Dhruv helicopters after a series of crashes that took place. In both cases, there have been fingers pointed at HAL. With Dhruv, there have been allegations, very quiet though,
Yeah.
that the HAL was not very receptive to feedback from the air forces from
Right.
the forces that were using Dhruv helicopters in terms of some technical issues that they felt the helicopters had. And with Tejas, even though HAL said it was a supply chain issue, there have been questions raised about what was HAL's role itself in
Right.
terms of the delays to Tejas Mark 1A. The reason I say that and mention that is just this morning, before we
Yeah.
recorded this, Air Force Chief Air Marshal Amarpreet Singh was at an event where he gave a very nice quote where he said, once a timeline is given, he said timeline is a big issue. Not a single project that I can think of has been completed on time. That's a
Yeah.
huge statement. And then he went on to say that at times, while signing the contract, we are sure it is not going to come up on time.
Right.
So yes, Sandeep, your overview of how did we reach a point where
Yes.
HAL, which so far thought कि सब कुछ तो हमें मिलेगा एविएशन
Yeah.
का डिफेंस
The
एविएशन
default
का,
default setting. Yeah.
बट अब इस बार नहीं मिल रहा है, and they'll have to
इस बार
fight
नहीं
for
मिल रहा
it.
है. Absolutely, they'll fight for it. But Dave, you didn't mention the other fight, which is actually the Black Swan event in the middle of all of this, which is Operation Sindoor.
Yes.
And that is the Black Swan event that's actually, I think, it's accelerated a whole lot of programs. It's changed mindsets also in the government because, they finally, you have a political leadership that understands air power. And it's very significant because, if you look at the way air power has been used since 1947, 1962, you had Prime Minister Nehru not authorizing the use of air power because he was afraid of escalating the conflict. Whereas there are people who are arguing now, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, that had the Indian Air Force been deployed then, the outcome of the 62 war would have been entirely different. We had a far superior air force than the Chinese air force at that time, which was their fighter jets were grounded because the Soviets had pulled out of their cooperation. So you could have recovered lost ground in 1962. Now you jump to 71, perfect textbook application of air power, no questions, no debates. You come to 1999, where again, the government of the day is very restrained in the use of air power, where the Prime Minister says, you can use the Air Force, but do not cross the LC. Whereas the Air Force said, look, this is not the way to use air power. Air power means you cannot draw a line of control in the sky, right? You have to go across the border. But now what you're seeing in the last 5 years is a better understanding of air power with this government, 6 years to be precise. 2019, when Balakot used IAF fighter jets for the first time, crossing over into Pakistan, bombing one terror camp, one mission, one target. And in 2025, of course, Operation Sindoor, multi-phase, multi-level escalation, where air forces used as coercive air power for the first time since 1971. And also, prior to that, in 2020, when China mobilizes opposite Ladakh, you have the Indian Air Force going in right away. And I was there on the ground. I saw those fighter jets landing in Leh. Big understanding of air power on the part of this government. So Operation Sindoor, I feel, is that Black Swan event that will really reshape the way air power is understood, air assets are looked at. The Air Force is going to be taken very, very seriously from now on. Not that it wasn't earlier, but now you've actually seen a demonstration of air power. You've seen the way the IAF fighter jets, standoff attacks, precision strikes on 11, 13 targets, 9 targets taken out on the first day of counter-terrorist missions in conjunct with the Indian Army, of course. And but the 10th of May belonged entirely to the Indian Air Force. So I think a lot of how the government is going to react is going to be shaped by the events of Operation Sindoor and the fact that the IAF's requirement for fighter aircraft, for stealthy fighter aircraft, is going to be top priority now on. So while earlier it was a given that HAL would be the default setting when it came to productionizing the AMCA, it's no longer the case. because there's been a considerable discussion within the government and the points that you made, Air Chief Marshal AP Singh's criticism of the HAL. There are other service chiefs also who believe that HAL has not been delivering as promised. So there's a lot of angst within the services among the service chiefs about HAL's ability to deliver as promised. So they're saying that, look, give the private sector a chance. Bring them also on board. Create competition. You can't have a monopoly of aircraft production and helicopter production. HAL is loaded with work. They have multiple fighter jet programs to deliver on. They have the LCA Mark 1A, they have the Mark 2, and of course many other helicopter programs as well. So they have a lot of orders. They're not short of orders. It's not that you take the AMCA away from them, they're going to stop functioning or they'll go into bankruptcy. They have plenty of orders. There is an order for a possible program for the Sukhoi 30 upgrades, right?
Yeah.
Which is something we should have started working on 20 years ago, which we didn't. But that's possibly a discussion for another day. But here the services in their wisdom have looked at different models. The government also has been looking at different models. And I can only think of the advanced technology vessel, the nuclear submarine project. Everything would have suggested that Mazgan Docks be given the contract to build submarines, because they were the only shipyard that had the ability to build submarines at that time. Smaller subs, of course. They'd built 2 German submarines. But the government brought in Larsen and Toubro as the main partner to actually fabricate the pressure hulls of the nuclear submarines. And today you have 4 submarines, 4 nuclear submarines, over 6,000 tons displacement in the water to be commissioned in the next year or two. Huge program, possibly our most complex defense programs, platforms as well. So here you're looking at the government possibly looking at another model like this one, like the Arihant class, the ATV project, where you'll have the private sector either working in competition with or in cooperation with the public sector. HAL is not completely out of the race, right? They're still there, but it's not a guarantee order for them. They will have to compete with Larsen and Toubro. They'll have to compete with TASL, Tata Advanced Systems Limited, all of these private sector players, and whoever gives the best bid wins. So it's a sense of the government bringing in competition into the aviation space, military aviation space. But of course, the dice is heavily loaded in HAL's favor, right? They have plant, machinery, trained manpower, all of that, right? They have facilities in Maharashtra, in Bengaluru, of course. It's in the news last couple of days. And of course, Koraput in Odisha, where they make the fighter jet engines. So you're looking at a behemoth. HAL is a behemoth. It's a public sector behemoth, of course. And you have the private sector saying, hey, give us a chance. Tata's has been building up very slowly over the last 15 years. They've started small, and today they are in a position where they're actually assembling major aircraft, transport aircraft, not fighter jets, of course. But for them to make that leap again, the government will have to take that leap of faith with them, whether TASL actually has it in them to deliver a 5th generation fighter aircraft. So it's a very complicated program, Dev. And as you mentioned, it's not so much about the technology, it's about the model as well. While that statement from the Defence Minister is welcome, we've still not got a lot of clarity on how they're going to go about it. For instance, who's going to allocate work share if there is a partnership? If there is, say, the government says, look, we want HAL to make the AMCA in partnership with TASL. But then who decides the work allocation? Because the Tatas will say, look, I don't want to work with HAL. That is a possibility, right? I want to have this work share, and they will not trust Defence Ministry because HAL is a Defence Ministry child, right? It's a child of the Department of Defence Production. So there are arguments that, there are very strong arguments being made for the NSA's office to be brought in, like the National Security Council Secretariat. NSCS should be the body that will actually be a neutral judge who will decide who gets the work share, how this program is to move. It's an extremely complicated program, Dev, as I mentioned, not just for the technology reasons, the fact that you need this kind of cutting edge technology to be developed in the platform itself, with the stealth, with the super cruise, with your your weapon base, sensor fusion, all of these cutting edge technologies. You have to develop it in parallel with this conundrum of public sector and private sector. So it is a kind of challenges that is going to make the LCA look like a walk in the park. And it is, and to add to all of this, you have your two-front war threat, where you have China, which has 300 plus fifth generation fighters, which would very happily transfer 40 of them to the Pakistan Air Force to put us on tenterhooks.
Yeah.
So it is a very, very complicated set of problems, and the AMCA is flying straight into this heavy weather. If it actually manages to fly in the timelines that we envisage it to.
Yeah. I very like your point a lot, the one you said right now, that this is more than just developing this advanced fighter jet. This is about sort of, it's like, ghar ka safai ho raha hai, because for so many years you've had this set system of how things work in India when it comes to production of aviation equipment for defense, for the military. And now you're trying to sort of, shake that up. And bring in new people and bring in new players and bring in a new way of working, work share allocation, like you said. That sort of like, makes me, reminds me of the time, I used to make the roster for my team. Yaar, tum ye karoge, jhagdna pad lekin.
Right.
And have those divides, right? How is HAL taking the statement that came out from the government? And the reason I ask that is, for somebody who's been doing this podcast for like around 2.5 years now, and has the benefit of having chatted with defense journalists like you, honestly, I am not surprised with the path the government has chosen. Yes, it's a controversial decision. Yes, it requires that ki karna hai attitude, but they've done it, and they've done it in the sense that they've said that that's what we are going for right now, but you never know what the ultimate decision is going to be. By the way, it could very well fall under HAL's umbrella, like sab kuch tum hi karoge. We don't know that yet, but the intent has been signaled.
Yes.
So did HAL also see this coming? Are they prepared for this challenge, or are they taking that negative look, what is happening with us? How can this happen?
No, I think HAL is a very mature company. I mean, it's been around for almost 100 years. So, and I think they saw this coming with the kind of, deep dissatisfaction that the services had, especially over the Advanced Light Helicopter, ALH, the grounding of the fleet. There were some serious issues there, technical issues, which the services have, raised with HAL. And as you mentioned, it was just happenstance that all of these things happened at the same time. They converged, and it was what is it that they say about troubles? They come in battalions. So it's something like that for HAL. But I think HAL is a very mature player. It is a strategic asset. There's no doubt about it. It's a national strategic asset. It's been created over several decades. There is a reason why it was built, and it continues. But there is also a need for competition to be brought in, right? And this has worked well in the past. It has served the national interest. So I'm saying that there is an interest above HAL or what they think about it. There is a supreme national interest that we need a fifth generation fighter aircraft to be flying in squadrons less than a decade from now, given the kind of pressure that we are facing on our borders with both Pakistan and China. And the fact that we have no option but to develop our own fifth generation fighter aircraft. Because otherwise, what is going to happen is that you will be in a perennial import mode, right? I think the other countries, our friends, our allies, see that, which is why you see this very intense jockeying from the Americans to sell us the F-35, from the Russians to sell us the Su-57, right? The Americans, they want to offload the F-35 on us. But I think after Operation Sindoor, I get the sense that there is a rethink in the government. Is the United States a reliable strategic partner when it comes to fighter jets? So we've bought everything from the Americans except fighter aircraft. That's always been, the crown jewel that we don't want to give the Americans. Russians, yes. The French, of course. But the Americans, maybe not now. And I think President Trump's statements during Operation Sindoor might have contributed to this alarm that's been raised in in the government. So I think they'll be looking at developing our own aircraft. It is, of course, it's a critical requirement, like I said. And they will possibly look at a small number of fifth generation fighter aircraft imported, like 2 squadrons perhaps, just to bridge a certain gap. Right, but the rest of it, there is no option. It's a TINA factor for us. There is no alternative to indigenous aircraft. So, I mean, to answer your question in short, I'm sure HAL saw this coming. There's been plenty of surround sound to suggest that this was indeed happening, and there is the DRDO chief, the former DRDO chief, has submitted a report some months back to the government, which actually spoke of a model, a consortium kind of model. That's Saraswat, Dr. V.K. Saraswat's report. And there have been n number of reports, from the government. Rajesh Kumar Singh's report, which was submitted in March, the defense secretary, the serving defense secretary, is asked for need to focus on the Air Force. It's very unusual for a single service report to be prepared by the government, looking at the Indian Air Force's worries, woes, and all of that. So there is a greater understanding of A, the threat that we face, B, the ways forward, the options before the government. So I think this is it. Like you said, now or never.
Yeah. Sandeep, I want to talk about the other side as well, the Indian Air Force, because of something that the Air Chief said a few months ago when he was at Aero India, actually, and a video went viral of him giving a dressing down to HAL officials. So he did not quite like that, actually. He was at a conclave a few months later, our conclave, a few weeks later, and he basically said that was like, it was a sort of a constructive discussion between me and the HAL guys, and the media kind of took it a different way.
Hot mic moment.
Yeah. But in that video, there was a point when he said, "Ki this is not about blame gaming. This is because when I point a finger at you, 3 are pointing at me." Yeah. And he basically went on to refer to, I forgot his exact words, but he went on to refer to the time of the Tejas development when there was a lot of controversy about, and HAL says this, that Air Force also played a huge role in the delays because they kept changing the requirements.
Yes.
कि यार हमें ये चाहिए, फिर आपको वो चाहिए, फिर आपको वो चाहिए, फिर आपको वो चाहिए, और आपको सब चाहिए.
Right.
Not quite possible, right?
Yeah.
So how involved and how clear is the Air Force about what it wants from its fifth generation aircraft? And do you see something, do you see a model of what's happened with the Indian Navy happening for the AMCA, where the Navy has been deeply involved in the designing, developing, trialing, and commissioning of almost any project, because of which I personally believe all their ships, all their submarines that have been Indian made have been usually, the projects have been flawless, not major, no major issues over there. So how clear is the Air Force with its AMCA dreams, or do you see what happened with the Tejas happening once again? Is that also a risk?
Yeah, well, again, Dave, you've hit the nail on the head. With the Tejas, I think the Air Force took a slightly standoffish point of view. And, the emphasis on indigenous platforms was not as much then as it is now. Today, it's an article of faith for this government, right? There's no escaping the fact that, and it's been said time and again, and you have seen with Operation Sindoor, indigenous solutions really coming of age. And one solution was something that BrahMos Corporation suggested to the Indian Air Force a long time ago, which was an air-launched BrahMos.
Yes.
And that was an entirely BrahMos Corp idea, which the Air Force, of course, picked up, embraced, and then developed for 2 squadrons, inducted it in 2 squadrons, and that has been used with devastating efficiency in the second wave of Op Sindoor, second and third waves of Op Sindoor. So, indigenous solutions for Indian wars, that is an article of faith now. It wasn't the case a couple of years back, which explains why the Air Force had a standoffish kind of attitude. They weren't as closely involved with the LCA program as possibly the Navy was in developing the naval version of the LCA. And here, the important part to understand, Dave, is whenever I talk to the ADA and the aircraft developers and designers, they always emphasize on the spiral development issue, which is that you take an aircraft at Mark 1, you develop it to Mark 1A, possibly even Mark 1B, and then you go on to Mark 2. Don't ask for everything on the first Mark 1 should be Mark 5 or Mark 6. There are other countries, countries that have a very rich, long lineage of fighter aircraft development understand it, that you gradually induct aircraft and then you keep on improving them through their lifetimes. So in our case, for instance, we've not done that. It was for Parikar to intervene and then work out this 1 Alpha program for the LCA, where he told the Air Force, he understood technology. So he told the Air Force, look, don't make all these requirements on the LCA for the Mark 1. Let the Mark 1 be inducted in smaller numbers. There is going to be a gap between Mark 1 and Mark 2. While they work on Mark 2, you induct the Mark 1 Alpha in limited numbers again. So you have that 83 or so Mark 1As coming in. So this kind of spiral development model is understood, and I think the Air Force now gets it. And I think they would have seen the lessons from the LCA and they would imbibe those in the AMCA. And it's really important here as well, because in AMCA also you have two models. You have the Mark 1, which is not as effective and as stealthy as the Mark 2. Now, the Mark 2 is supposed to be the final configuration with the full works, the internal weapon base, some of the external payload, the external hard points as well. So that is going to be the final version of the AMCA, and possibly that would come in the late 2030s. Now, this is a question you asked about the Gen 5.5. So this Gen 5.5 is a way of saying that we are fully aware of the fact that we are behind the curve on the 5th generation fighter aircraft, but we are going to load the 5th generation with a little more than what a normal 5th generation aircraft would be. It won't be like a base model. It'll be a base model plus a lot of other enhancements that have, like artificial intelligence, those kind of things, sensor fusion. We will make sure that it is better than a 5th generation fighter that exists in the world.
Yeah. Right. We'll talk more about this, especially about a crucial component that is at the heart of fighter jet, which is the jet itself. But after a quick break.
What is the coolest bike of the 2000s?
For me, it was the Pulsar.
Pulsar 180.
Pulsar 200, that one.
No, actually no.
So what else so the CBZ was the coolest. What else could you have?
Fiero.
Fiero.
Fiero was also good.
That's
Fiero
one
also looked
motorcycle.
nice.
That's one motorcycle from TVS, which was so underrated. Hero Honda Sleek.
Why do you always pick the most boring motorcycle?
you know-
80s? What is our pick? What is...
RX100.
RX100 came in
I
1990,
would say-
Rahul. Yaar.
What are you talking about? My uncle booked a Hero Honda CD100 SS.
In the 80s?
Yes.
That's a 4-stroke.
Yes, you are right.
But wait. No.
Yes. He booked a CD100 SS late 80s. I'm talking about 86, 87.
ESD created the enthusiast
Yes.
in India at some level. Or maybe at a very big level.
Yes.
I think so. What about the Pulsar 135 LS?
That was a great
That
bike.
was a good motorcycle
was a
to ride.
great bike.
Yeah?
That
Really
had the
good.
Love
jeans.
that.
That had the jeans.
Welcome back. Sandeep, I now want to talk about the engine because I think that's one topic that often gets missed when talking about fighter jets, and it only gets highlighted when you have something of the sort that happened with the Tejas Mark 1A, the delays, because that is when people realized, oh, hey, by the way, engine तो अपना है ही नहीं, US का है, oh, वो लोग supply नहीं कर रहे, oh my God, what is going on? Kaveri. I thought it was shelved. I thought that project got off to nowhere. It was the engine was designed by DRDO, a lab. I forgot the name. Forgot the GTR.
GTRE,
The GTRE. GTRE. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
The GTRE. Gas turbine research and something.
Establishment. Gas
Establishment. Yes.
turbine.
Right. I think that there were trials but never really got anywhere, and I think I thought it had been shelved. But for the last year or so, especially after you saw delays for the Tejas Mark 1A because we are waiting for engines from the US, which have now I think started arriving. There was some chatter about Kaveri, and as recently as this week, there was this huge social media trend of fund the Kaveri engine. I'll help fund the Kaveri engine, but get it going.
Yes.
How crucial do you think developing an Indian jet engine is for the AMCA project, or do you think there's no point reinventing the wheel when you have global behemoths who can design and can give you a jet engine.
Global, yeah.
But then you obviously run into problems like the kind you saw with Tejas Mark 1A. So how important is it for us to have our own engine?
Yeah, Dave, I cannot but overemphasize the point that without your own engine, you are nowhere in the fighter jet business. Without your own engine, all you're designing are airframes. You're just building airframes, and you're waiting for a foreign jet engine to come there and fit into your airframe and fly your fighter jet. A fighter jet, it's the heart of your fighter aircraft program. If you're not building those jet engines yourself, you're in serious trouble. And fighter jet engine, it's easier said than done. Because only 4 countries have done it till now. And the 5th country has just joined the club after much struggle and blood and treasure and stealing IPRs. The Chinese, they finally got it with their W series jet engines. But this is literally the crown jewels of any country's secrets, defense secrets. They will never part with it. We've been friends, allies almost with the Russians for so many decades. They've never given us the fighter jet engine know-how or know why. All we've been doing for the last 20-25 years is we've been assembling the AL-31FP engines for the Su-30s. We don't have the know-how to build our own engines. For 2 decades, we've just been building those engines, right? So even the French, for that matter, the French, the Russians, whoever our closest allies, they will never give you the engine technology. So the short answer is you have no option but to build your own. And Kaveri was a great project. It began, but it didn't meet the required KN thrust that they wanted, the kilonewtons that they wanted, which is almost touching 90. It could only get to about 50 or so, which is why the government shelved that program in 2014. And they've decided to use the Kaveri, the dry thrust engine. You don't need afterburners for the UCAV. So the UCAV, which was called the Ghatak also at some point, that is going to be powered by this version of the Kaveri, the dry thrust engine. And in the future, you're going to look at a Kaveri 2.0 with either the Russian collaboration or the French helping you out. But the short thing is that you have no way but to develop your own fighter jet engines. And it's not such a big hurdle as well. If you put your mind to it, if you decide that this is a national strategic program and it is not just a GTRE program, that's a problem. You can't say, oh, GTRE was supposed to develop the Kaveri. They have not done it. We gave them all the resources. It cannot be a GTRE program. It has to be an all-of-nation approach. You have to identify the problem. You have to look at it. Where am I hitting hurdles? Is it the testing? Do I have the testing facilities for the engine? Firstly, we don't. That's a problem. The metallurgy. Who can get me the metallurgy? Who can do this? It has to be an all-of-government approach. It has to be driven top-down. All of these countries that have built it so far, the Chinese being the 5th, they understood it. They got it, which is why they went hell for leather. In our case, I'll give you another example of how we went about getting the nuclear reactor for the nuclear submarine, right? This is again a technology that only 5 countries in the world have perfected. We got ours because we decided somewhere in the late 90s, that we've tested nuclear weapons. The best way to launch nuclear weapons is from under the water. Nuclear submarine is the way to do it. But our nuclear submarine design hasn't gone anywhere. We don't have the reactor. The most important thing of a nuclear sub is the reactor. Compacting a huge reactor into a pressure hull of a submarine is the ultimate engineering marvel in defense. We didn't have the technology then. So we went to the Russians. The Russians helped us, but with an earlier version of the nuclear reactor. Now, the Chinese have also been helped by the Russians similarly, and they've built on that expertise. Now, I'm coming back to that spiral development thing. You don't just take an engine, use it, and then throw it and say, no, I'm now going to start, de novo, start a new engine. You go spiral development. You keep improving that engine, improving its output, which is what they've done with the nuclear reactor design. Now, that was an insurmountable target. At some point, it appeared that, we'll never get our own reactor. But today, look at it. We have 4 nuclear subs in the water. 2 are on deployment. a third is on, and 2 more are on sea trials, right? So if we could do it with nuclear submarines, the most complex reactor technology, we can certainly do it with the fighter jet and start small and then keep building on it, pushing, and then we'll get it. And we have no option, like I said, we have no option but to design and develop our own fighter jet engines.
Yeah, I like your point that, yeah, of course you can do it. You just have to set your mind to it because, again, you've developed, like you said, the miniaturized reactor for nuclear subs. You've sent rockets. You've sent a rover to the moon. You've developed the BrahMos missile, which that is something that comes close to sort of the engine you require in a fighter jet.
But you know, my friends in ADA would be very unhappy with that comparison because they say, look, or GTRE, a fighter jet engine has to work all the time, right? BrahMos is a one-way ticket. The Mars rocket, the Moon rocket, these are all one-way missions. You know, you're not coming back. But here, the jet engine has to, it has to run all the time. It has to, variations of speed and acceleration, all of those things. It has to, it's the heart. It's the heart.
Right.
It has to go on for several years.
Yes. Right. But a quick follow-up. So we have no option but to do it. Are we doing it? So the reason I ask that is it part of this rupees 15,000 crore project that the engine will be developed simultaneously as part of this project? Or is this disbursement of money only going to be for developing, like you said, the airframes, the technology that will sort of work on that plane, etc., and the engine development will happen separately? Or do we have no knowledge about this?
We have, as far as I understand it, the engine development is separate from this. And that is where we are looking at the foreign collaborators, foreign collaborations, partnerships with either France or with Russia. We have a tech agreement with the US as well, with the GE414. That's a third line of possibility that we're looking at. So now the hope is that these countries will give us the technology to build our own engine. But if you are to develop your own engine, I believe you have to go solo, and you have to get some kind of consultancy, design assistance, and all that. Without that, it's not going to happen. Because the reason we bailed out of the Su-57 fifth generation fighter aircraft, we were part of it to begin with in 2009 or so, and we had a joint venture. We put down a lot of money. I think it was couple of $100 million, if I remember correctly. And in 2017 or 18, the government decided to pull out of the fifth generation fighter aircraft because the Russian program, because they felt that Russia was not giving us the technology we wanted. We were already coming into an aircraft that had already been developed and designed. So there was nothing for us to learn from that. So, which is why they pulled out and said, look, we will go our independent path with AMCA. So here we are, 2025.
Right. So what happens to the Air Force's current and pressing need for fighter jets? So you have the Mark 1As coming, 83, 97 more are, if I'm not wrong, on the order. But there is still the question of what do you do with the number of fighter jets you need right now? Because like you said, AMCA is going to take around a decade or so, at least, to sort of see the light of day. And that, I'm guessing, is what you say for the prototyping of it. Then if you're happy with it, you place orders, then the production comes, so there's more delays. There's this talk that there might be a new MRFA tender, global competition once again, between different fighter jets. You have the US offer of F-35s. You always have the option of buying more Rafale jets because you already have them in service. So makes sense to just get a couple of more squadrons from there. There is Tejas Mark II. Is it even coming? Is that shelved? So while we talk of AMCA, what about these other questions, other projects? Like I said, Tejas Mark II, is it there? Is it not? What do we know about that? Or rather, what's your outlook on that?
Well, interesting question, Dave. Now, the fact is that the Air Force is in a crisis. If you talk to whichever way you look at it, I mean, 31 squadrons, sanction strength of 42. Threats are increasing by the day. The PLA Air Force at one point was a pretty down market Air Force in the 2001s when India had a 1:3 ratio with the Pakistan Air Force. And now, almost a quarter century later, that ratio has come down to 1:1.5. Because the Pakistan Air Force has been steadily building up its capabilities. It's been upgrading its fighter aircraft. It's been acquiring new fighter aircraft, primarily Chinese, the J-10s and the JF-7s and JF-17s. So we're looking at an Indian Air Force that has been acquiring fighter jets through a method that I can only call drip irrigation, right? Whereas what you need is actually you need a dam burst of fighters. You have the Air Force chief saying, I need something like 40 to 50 fighter jets to be inducted every year. If I am to just stand here, right, to maintain my 31 squadron numbers. Because you're looking at 2035, you said AMCA starts coming in a decade from now. What will the Air Force look like without the AMCA, without more fighters?
Jets,
You're looking at all your MiG-29s out of service. You're looking at most of the Mirages going, all your Jaguars going. MiG-21s will just retire in a year or two squadrons that's left. So every aircraft but for your Rafale and your Sukhois are going to be in service. So you need something like 200 to 300 fighter aircraft to come in. That's a very large number. So which is why they're saying we need 40 aircraft a year. That's a very, very ambitious target. And to add to that now, the Air Force is saying 42 aircraft are not, or 42 fighter aircraft squadrons are not going to be enough for us. They're projecting a requirement of something like 60 fighter aircraft squadrons by 2047. It's a very ambitious number, Dave. You're going to hear more of this actually in the next couple of months, given how concerned the Indian Air Force is about falling, squadron numbers. There's another view that says that they're projecting a higher number, 60 squadrons, in the hope that they at least get to maybe 40, 45 squadrons.
Classic bargaining.
Yeah. So, but if you look at it, there is a serious threat. Yeah. You're looking at the PLA Air Force, which has got 300 plus fifth generation fighters, and which is inducting fifth generation fighter aircraft at the rate of 40 to 50 a year. So you have them focusing only on Gen 5 aircraft. Pak Air Force is at Gen 4, Gen 4.5. They're looking at 2 squadrons of fifth generation fighter aircraft. And why do you need fifth generation fighter aircraft now? The interesting thing is that stealthy aircraft like this have the ability to look at, to penetrate airspaces which are heavily guarded by GBADs, the ground-based air defense networks, like the S-400, the HQ-9s and all of that. So the role of stealthy fifth generation fighter aircraft become all the more critical in such heavily defended airspaces. The only way you can penetrate AD bubbles, for instance, is through stealthy aircraft, which is why the Americans are going hell for leather for the sixth generation new generation air dominance fighters. The Chinese are building up on all of their things. It's a technology race at the end of the day. Ground based air defenses are becoming more complex, more sophisticated. Therefore, the fighter jets will have to be, stay a step ahead of them. So it's a big race for numbers. The Air Force is looking at larger numbers. They're looking at as an expanding hole in their fighter squadron capabilities. And like you mentioned, the MMRCA is being revived as the multi-role fighter aircraft requirement. There is a requirement. The Air Force believes that they would need something like 70 or 72 fighters to come in very quickly. But the problem again, Dave, is that these are very, very expensive. I mean, you know how much the Navy spent for that 26 aircraft Rafale deal. Rafale M, they spent $7 billion. That's a lot of money. If you look at 7 into 3 times that thing, you're looking at anything above $20 billion, $25 billion for just that 72 aircraft requirement for the Indian Air Force. So then it becomes, a battle for resources. Then the government will have to sit and allocate, look, do I need to import these aircraft? How many can I build within the country? So it's going to be a very complex, argument for the Indian Air Force to make.
Quick follow-up there as well. I get that it's complex in terms of how many can we afford right now. But why are we still thinking about which one to go for? The reason I ask that is that you already had a competition. The Rafale was the winner. Your Air Force is very happy with it. It performed exceptionally during the recent conflict with Pakistan. you also bought the naval version for the Navy, so you have that a fighter in service. You have the necessary repair equipment and all the ecosystem that you need to support a fighter jet, the know-how, etc. So why are you even considering any other aircraft? Why just do, like, you figure out the finances, go to the balance sheet, देखो account में पूछो कितना पैसा हमारे पास, accordingly just place more orders for the Rafale.
I wish it were that easy.
Why is it not?
But now again, the Rafale was the down select for the Indian Air Force when the MRC was selected, which they didn't go through finally. They just bought 36 of them.
Yeah.
The Navy's got 26 of them. So yes, there is a strong case to be made for buying more Rafales, that you just do 72 more, transfer technology, build, in country, get a production line going, bring down costs, bring in MROs, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Find a way of building it indigenously. There's another voice that says that, look, if you do that, you're going to kill our LCA Mark II, for instance. Because, finally at the end of the day, resources are not infinite. And when the government is looking at the pie, he's going to decide, look, do I import these aircraft? Do I build them indigenously? Do I develop the engines here? Do I import? It's a complicated argument for the government to make when it's deciding on imports, such high-end imports. So big ticket items like this, 70 plus imports, are going to be looked at with very, very great alarm by the government. So if you look at it, historically, all the purchases, I mean the last 10 years, have been smaller numbers. The requirements projected were much larger. Air Force wanted 126. Government came down to 36. Navy wanted 50 plus for the deck-based fighters. Imported ones, they came down to 26. So my sense is that they will go for a mix of a smaller number of Rafales with a larger number of indigenous fighters like the LCA Mark II.
Yeah.
The numbers will always come from indigenous fighters. They will never come from imports, because those imports, I mean, the cost, it's horribly, there is no comparison. It's like for the price of one Rafale, you could buy probably 3 LCAs, Mark IIs.
Yeah, right. Last point on this episode, and I'm going to talk about the Indian Navy, because I think when it comes to fighter jets, the Navy gets the short end of the stick because of its small requirements, right? So no one talks about it. But the Navy also has equal concerns, right? Because you have 2 aircraft carried in service, the Vikramaditya and the Vikrant. There is a thought that the Navy will go in for a not repurchase, but another order of a INS Vikrant type of aircraft carrier.
IAC 1 Alpha.
Slightly more weight, if I'm not wrong, is what has been talked about. We don't know the specifics yet, but there is some talk about that. Right now, you have around, if I'm not wrong, 45 odd MiG-29Ks, the naval variants. We don't know the exact number for some reason. I don't know why. You've placed orders for, you are about to place orders for the Rafale from France. But the Navy also needs fighter jets. Otherwise, karoge kya aircraft carrier ka? The AMCA is, I'm guessing, solely for the Air Force. The Navy has rejected the LCA naval variant. They want what is now known as the TEDBEF, the twin engine deck-based fighter. So where is that in all of this? Or is the AMCA development going to lead to something for the Navy as well? What does Navy get out of whatever we are investing in when it comes to our own fighter?
So Dave, as you mentioned, the Navy has a requirement for fighter jets, but it's much smaller than what the Air Force's requirements are. So they have to basically replace the MiG-29s, 40-odd MiG-29s that are in service, MiG-29 Ks, and the Navy would look at air wings for 2 carriers and possibly the third. So you're looking at something like about 60 fighter jets. That's not a lot of fighters. It's about 3 squadrons plus. Naval requirements are usually much smaller than what it is for the Indian Air Force. So the way forward is the 26 Rafales are going to be the interim, which will replace the first of the MiG-29s as they go out of service. The MiG-29s have been in service for about 2 decades now. It's not been a very happy experiment for the Indian Navy, because these were completely untested aircraft when they were bought. The Russian Navy, the Soviet Navy actually pioneered the use of the MiG-29K, but it was not purpose-built for aircraft carrier operations. It was a land-based fighter, which was then converted into a carrier-based fighter. In our case, a Stobar fighter jet. Now, they believe that the 26 Rafales will be an interim, and then you will have the 10 BF coming at some point, the twin-engine deck-based fighters. Because, the life of an aircraft carrier, as you know, is much longer than the life of a fighter jet.
Yeah.
So an aircraft carrier has a life of about almost half a century, 50 years. And a fighter jet would have a, thing of effective combat life of 25, 30 years. So you possibly would have an aircraft carrier looking at two different fighter variants. And here in this case, the Vikramaditya and, of course, the new INS Vikrant came with the MiG-29 case. They will switch over at some point to the Rafale Ms, and they will also possibly have the TED BF. Now, there is a requirement for an AMCA fifth generation fighter jet. We're looking at smaller numbers again, but that's not a high priority. It's not a top priority for the ADA or for the Indian Navy right now. Though if you ask me, they should have started with developing a naval variant of the AMCA first. Given how complex this platform is, carrier operations are very, very extremely complex. To develop aircraft that can withstand, the stresses of landing on a deck, all of those problems would have been solved first, and then adapting them for land-based use is not as it's not as difficult as it is the other way around. So here you're going to have a challenge now to take a fighter jet that's developed for land-based operations for the Indian Air Force, and then marinizing it, and strengthening the undercarriage and doing all of that. That's going to be a big task. But I think it is primarily the AMCA. You should look at it primarily as an Indian Air Force requirement. Small numbers for the Indian Navy. I mean, if it comes, well and good. But focus is to get it for the Air Force, because the numbers are much. Air Force needs something like 10 squadrons of AMCAs. They're committed to buying about between 8 and 10 squadrons. Navy's requirements, of course, don't matter as much as the Air Force requirements.
Right. One final very quick point, if I could ask you to speculate and do just plain guesswork based on just your gut feeling, based on what you know of the situation now, and based on whatever you've seen over the years. How do you see the AMCA project, panning out over the next 15 years? Whom do you see the contract being given to? That when do you see the first flight happening, whether the test flight or the Air Force flight and stuff like that? Just plain guesswork from you. What do you see for this project in the future?
I wish I'm an optimist, eternal optimist, Dave. I mean, I think the first flight they're promising 2028 in the next 3 years. They must do it. We have no option. We have to do it. This has to be a top-down kind of thing. Diktats have to be passed. Like, you cannot, because we've already lost a lot of time on this. You have to develop that aircraft. You have to get it flying you have to get the prototypes flying in the next 3 years, and start the induction process and try and compress deadlines as much as possible. See where, again, that all of government approach needs to come in. It has to be treated as a national project. It cannot be treated as, it's just an Air Force project, or it's a DRDO project or something like that. You have to get a consortium going, and it has to be steered at a very top level. So I think if all goes well, if given the new prominence to air power that this government has given, I would think 2035 is not a impossible, unsurmountable problem to get the AMCA inducted by 2033. 2033 is ideally the time that you should be looking at, which is the next 8 years or so to start inducting the AMCA. And again, I'll emphasize Mark 1. Start with Mark 1 and then slowly build up on Mark 1. Don't emphasize that, we need everything in the first Mark itself, right in the first couple of squadrons itself. So I think given all of this and the new, enlightenment that's come on with air power and the consortium approach, I would think it would be, if I were to hazard a guess, I think it would be a consortium of HAL and Tatas that will execute this project. I don't see HAL being completely put out of the. It's impossible. You cannot, cut out your biggest aircraft manufacturer, your only aircraft fighter jet manufacturer from this contract. So I think it will be a consortium of HAL, TASL, and possibly other private players are also kind of pitching in. It will be a consortium approach that the government will follow.
Yeah. I think I'd rather put it as it will be a sort of a national building model,
Yes.
basically. Every know-how that you have in the country will be used for this to ensure that it happens and it happens on time.
Absolutely.
Great, Sandeep, great chat. I had got lots of insights from you and had a lot of fun. So thanks so much for being on this podcast.
Thanks for having me there.
That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries without a passport. Bye-bye.